So I just watched Rebel Moon and I enjoyed it. So I wanted to see why this man thinks this film is so horrible.
I finally watched Zack Snyder's new movie, Rebel Moon, Part 1, A Child of Fire. But I promise you, the only fire this movie offers is the one that's going to be ignited in your soul with rage over how awful it is and how angry it makes you for wasting over 130 minutes of your life. Do you remember all that hoopla a couple weeks ago where big fans of Zack Snyder were screaming and shouting from the rooftops about how unfair it is that Rebel Moon Part 1 has a low Rotten Tomatoes scores from critics?
No, not really.
Then the claim started floating around that Rebel Moon was the victim of review bombing, so all the reviews that were being posted weren't genuine or reliable whatsoever, so you couldn't take the Rotten Tomatoes score as an indicator of it being bad, because it's actually extremely good, and that the critics' reviews here are just baloney. Well, that's a bunch of cope right there. That is the biggest lie ever told since me trying to pretend I was 6 feet tall on Tinder.
We all know you're a tiny man. I have to say something here. Review scores are not the end all of how a movie should be perceived. I'm always going to champion actually taking the time to watch a movie over taking either mine or even Charlie's advice here.
This movie shouldn't even have a 24% on Rotten Tomatoes. That seems high. That is generous. How it has a 65% audience score is an affront to God himself.
It's at 61 from what I'm seeing today, but can you get to the review portion already? You're just dragging your feet at this point.
Because this is not a good movie no matter how you spin it. It is extraordinarily derivative of just Star Wars itself to the point where it almost feels like it was supposed to be satirical of Star Wars.
He can't even spell derivative. But joking aside, I'm almost positive this movie was a pitch for Star Wars. I'm not going to be naive and say I didn't see similarities, because there were some, but that doesn't make a movie bad. For example, Spaceballs is a parody of Star Wars. That doesn't make it a bad movie. If anything, it's great. If that doesn't please anyone, just remember that even Star Wars itself was based on those old Flash Gordon serials.
But if it was created by someone going through a really edgy phase in their life.
It wasn't. That's just how Zack Snyder makes movies. Not everything is edgy, and quite frankly, whether you find something edgy or not isn't really a flaw in something.
I hate to draw the immediate and obvious connection to Star Wars, but it's very clear that had a huge influence here because there are so many plot elements that are directly shared with Star Wars.
Oh yeah, like that part in Star Wars where someone who was enslaved has to take their freedom back by training a beast. Or that other part in Star Wars where the female lead was a prisoner of war and rose her way through the ranks of the army that destroyed her life only to become a rebel and desert that army. Or how about when someone who manages a farmland doesn't become the conventional hero at the end of the story? Who would even be the equivalent character to Nemesis in Star Wars?
As well as just blatantly having a lightsaber ripoff.
Dude, come on. Be serious. Who gives a shit if it's a laser sword ripoff? I know I didn't, and it was in one scene of the whole movie. And honestly, it was a better executed scene than any of the sequel trilogy's lightsaber fights, so kudos to Zack Snyder.
It's so shameless. There is a character in this movie that uses lightsabers. Come on.
So first of all, Nemesis starts the fight with two regular swords, then towards the end of the fight, uses her gauntlets to power her swords into flame swords. At no point in this movie does she pull out a lightsaber, use the Force, and tell her enemy that she has the high ground. What is even shameless about this? The scene was pretty well done from my perspective. And they're not even lightsabers, they're just regular swords that she adds her flame power to. It's not even the Force. It's literally fire. Also, is it shameless when The Flash has lightsabers, or Gundam or any other space or sci-fi related show?
It's right in your face. Zack Snyder is pounding his meat into your mouth, letting you know that this is Star Wars fanfic.
From one fight scene where it looks like a lightsaber but isn't. And even if it was a well choreographed fight scene. How does that make it a bad movie?
Done really poorly. So, there's this spider woman who eventually fights the lightsaber wielder, which I think is a really cool concept and a really cool idea. And in fact, the scene between them is pretty good. Now, as I understand it, this was something Zack Snyder tried to pitch for quite a while.
Clearly you don't understand that. 'Cause if you did, why would you complain about there being Star Wars references in something that was supposed to be a Star Wars movie?
And was constantly turned down until recently, where he was given the means to make it. And man, it should have stayed in the drafts. This should not have made it to the screen whatsoever.
In your opinion.
So let's dive in. Let's start with its disjointed plot and nonsensical subplots that it tries to introduce here. Now, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis, and it's going to sound really familiar to some property you've seen in the past. So if there's any copyright attorneys in here, you might start sweating when hearing this. There's an evil intergalactic empire that wants to control the whole galaxy, and they're bad news, Buster. You don't want them paying you a visit, because shit will pop off. And if things don't go their way on the planets they visit, if they don't want to serve the way that they think the planet should serve them, they have no hesitation blowing the planet up.
I want to point out that there's a scene in the movie where the evil army doesn't give a shit and obliterated a planet that did nothing to them. It's in Korra's flashback monologue how like the general at that time was bloodthirsty and didn't give a fuck about peace or whatever. He just wanted to fight.
With their low orbit beams that will explode the planet. Our protagonist is one of the most fearsome warriors that empire had ever produced.
Well, no. She was a general who rose her way through the ranks since her childhood. Did you watch the movie? There was another general who was disgraced in the movie. She wasn't alone.
But she left that life behind in order to live a life of solitude on an isolated planet elsewhere.
That's not quite exactly what happened. We don't know the full context of what actually happened after the royal family was assassinated. But she essentially went into hiding because she could have been blamed for their assassination since Belisarius wants to honor the slain king by crucifying her in the shadow of the Senate. Also, the royal family's assassination was blamed on an outsider, who was probably Korra. We don't know the full details yet. This will probably be more fleshed out in the sequel. But she did not just abandon her way of life for no reason. There was more to it than that, obviously, is what I'm getting at.
But unfortunately, the ghosts from the past pay her a visit. The Empire comes through, and in doing so, they cause a ruckus on this new planet that she's trying to call home, and thus she decides to rise up and lead a rebellion against this evil empire that she left so long ago.
No, she was reluctant at first. She was planning on escaping until something horrible was about to happen that she had to stand up for the villagers of that farm town. Then she started her journey after that.
That's the bare bones of it. I don't even really care if it's like a super simple plot, to be honest, because you can make that work as long as you fill it with an interesting world and interesting characters, neither of which this movie successfully accomplishes.
Again, that's in your opinion. I, however, thought the world and characters were interesting. I loved the mischievous Kai. You just know you can't trust this dude, but he's a fun time nonetheless. Ray Fisher was barely in the movie, but his voice is a lot deeper than I remember it. Korra was a decent protagonist. I loved when she beat Noble's ass at the end. It was so cathartic. Gunnar was great as your everyday man. I also loved that he wasn't this badass with secret kung fu training. Like he was just some normal dude. It was great. You rarely see that in action movies. Nemesis is cool. There's a good ensemble cast here. Oh, and Anthony Hopkins killed it as the robot Jimmy. We definitely need more Jimmy.
So, its characters are the most soulless I think I've ever seen in a sci-fi movie. They are so bland and emotionless. They don't have a personality at all. Zack Snyder forgot to write that.
Did we watch different movies? I'd say Korra had more of a personality than Rey's Star Wars did.
And he forgot to write the characters bonding with each other.
Korra and Gunnar started out together. So you have that basic connection. And throughout the movie, they get to know each other and bond in that way. But other than that, the other characters were just in it for the fight. They don't really bond until after Noble is defeated. It brings them closer together, seeing that they can possibly change the course of this fight. Also, Kai underhandedly tries to get close to Korra, to ultimately get her to let her guard down for his eventual heel turn. Also, something else I want to add to this is that these characters don't all need to be the best of friends to fight for the same cause. It's like saying as a complaint towards Star Wars, why are Lando and Han Solo not the best of friends who go clubbing together? Like, that is not the point of Star Wars. They're fighting for a cause. They're not in a rebellion to have good times and be friends. They're there because they have to be.
So the whole film is basically just collecting new members for the rebellion for the most part.
Also keep in mind, this is part one of a two-part story.
And when they do so, they join very easily. It doesn't take much convincing at all. It's not really feeling earned when they join.
Why would Han Solo, who is a smuggler and a thief, join the rebellion? And he did it pretty easily too. It wasn't earned. If that sounds stupid to you, it's because it's a stupid argument. I'm sorry. They're all fighting the same fight. It doesn't matter how easily they joined or not. Ray Fisher even makes that point in the movie. And his sister doesn't actually join the rebellion, so there's that, I guess. Jimmy doesn't either. We need more Jimmy.
And when they're there, you don't ever see them interact with each other. They're all basically just fucking strangers to one another.
Because that's exactly what they are. They're all there to fight the good fight. They're not there to make friends. How do you not understand the basic plot points of the movie?
I don't know how you can make a movie like this and forget the most important part, which is showcasing character bonding and building relationships.
How is that the most important part of a movie? Not every fucking movie is the Avengers. These people are fighting a rebellion. Friendship is the least of their concern. Like, be serious.
It doesn't even attempt to do that in any way.
Because it doesn't need to. They don't need to bond or be friends. They're fighting a rebellion. They're not trying to become class president. Not everything is rainbows or friendship is magic.
But anyway, these characters really don't have any kind of defining personality traits whatsoever. In fact, they all kind of share the exact same traits. They're all stoic, they're all brooding, and they're all mad.
Do you want them to be happy when they're victims of war and an imperial army threatens their way of life and are literally fighting for a fucking rebellion? But Kai is pretty happy-go-lucky if that's what you want. Also, Titus was a washed-up, disgraced war hero. Why didn't he have a smile on his face? It ruined the whole movie. That's how dumb you sound.
All the time. And I don't even mean like outwardly mad, like screaming or anything. They don't even get that emotional. They're just always like angry, like wearing a big frown on their face because it's all so grim and dark in this universe.
Right, so they should be happy that they're fighting for their lives. And are wanted fugitives who, when captured by the army, are going to be killed in cold blood. Got it.
The only one of their crew that even somewhat has a personality is Kai. And he basically just becomes their chauffeur. He drives them around to collect new members for the rebellion.
Do you know why he did that?
And that's kind of his whole role.
No, he doesn't understand why Kai was the way he was. He was lying to round them up and sell our heroes for profit.
And he sometimes makes some wise cracks. Thus, you can make an argument that there is at least a semblance of a personality to him, whereas everybody else has nothing. It's so weird how you could make a cast of characters this uninteresting.
I found them interesting. To each their own, I guess.
And what's wild is, you don't even get to see them use their expertise.
This is part 1 of the story. We'll probably see that in part 2. One of my complaints was that this was a movie instead of being a miniseries. There's only so much story you can tell in 2 hours.
For example, one of the people that joined the rebellion is supposed to be this hotshot general. And the only reason you even know that this guy is a big deal is because when they're reflecting, the Empire's reflecting on this mounting rebellion, one of the big bad guys says, and then they have General Tiberius, I think is what it was. I'm already forgetting the names because, again, the characters are just not interesting. But he's like, General Tiberius is with them? You mean the genius general? One of our finest generals ever? And it's like, oh, okay, so he's a big deal. But he never uses that expertise at all.
I gotta stop you here, bro. Did you watch the movie? I'm asking genuinely. When we meet General Titus, he's a washed-up, disgraced, fallen general. You'll probably see him leading more in part 2.
When he joins the crew, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything at all. Really, none of the characters do for the most part.
Again, this is only part 1. I'm not going to keep pointing this out, but clearly there's going to be more to this story than just what we're seeing in part 1.
So there's like a prince that joins, has no role to play in this group whatsoever, and him being a prince has no role to play in this whatsoever.
He's referring to Tarek, who helps fight at the end.
The general doesn't use any of his expertise.
Okay, let's keep it a bean here. The plan that was set in motion by Korra was to find members of the rebellion to help them, round them up, then return home. The final set piece of the film is a setup set by Kai. He planned to sell out the vigilantes from the start. The original plan was they were going to help Kai with his supposed last trade as a dealer, then rendezvous back home and plan from there. I don't know what you're expecting the general to do in that situation. He was almost a goner if it wasn't for Gunner taking a stand against Kai. After all this, they return and we'll see what happens from there on in part 2.
It's like, it's just, they have all these like subplots and all these like tiddlywinks of lore that never go anywhere. And they kind of just serve as like bench players behind our main character as well as the main farmer that joins them.
Okay, I'm not going into that whole diatribe again. But the first part of this film was them just rounding up the heroes. The second part was going back home to plan out what they were going to do from there. I guess you need to have basic media literacy to understand the plot of the movie you just fucking watched.
And the main farmer, like, he is probably the most personality-less out of all of them.
I don't know how you're watching this movie thinking, wow, none of these characters have personalities. They do. The head of the village, Sindri, just wanted the Imperial Army to leave and wasn't willing to share their boon with them. He wanted to lay low till they left. However, Noble caught on he was lying, and fairly easily, and killed him for that. You could blame Gunnar, but Sindri was just trying to do right by his village, and Noble made an example out of him for even trying. If you don't see personality in that, then you're the one with a problem.
So much bad shit happens to him, and some of it is like actually directly his fault, and he just sits there just super stone cold stone face, and sometimes he'll do this. And that's it. Like, there's no depth to any of these characters. They don't flesh them out. They don't do anything with them. It's basically just like having action figures in your movie.
I think this problem stems from being part one of a two-part movie. There isn't enough time to have each character fully fleshed out. Again, this movie would have benefited from being a mini-series. I like the movie, but I can't admit that.
And then occasionally Zack Snyder decides he wants to play with them, so he'll make some of the lamest action sequences you'll ever fucking see.
Lame, yeah, I call bullshit here. If there's one thing Zack Snyder does right, it's having beautiful cinematography and great action set pieces. They were all good. This guy's full of shit.
He has this obsession with slow motion for this movie.
Oh, no slow motion. I guess that's bad now for some reason.
I swear to God, at least 45 minutes of this film's runtime is dedicated to slow-mo shots. And they're so lame.
Not as lame as this awful review.
It's like the most boring things you could ever use slow-mo for. One of them, I shit you not, is a character jogging. And he's jogging. And he's jogging. And he's jogging. And he's jogging. And then he finally jumps onto the back of a bird that threw him off. Like, it's just so, like, why slow-mo that? Slow-mo the jump. Don't slow-mo the entire jog up there.
It's to build tension, you buffoon.
It is agonizing. Oh my God, it was miserable. I felt like I was in some kind of fucking time vortex.
I thought it was fine. I think you're overreacting.
Like, just, it was actually, I actually felt like Zack Snyder wanted to personally offend me and waste my time.
Well, he did, and he succeeded, clearly.
With how much slow-mo he puts in here. You have to really fuck up to make slow motion boring.
At no point does the slow-mo even look bad. If anything, it helps you see the shots more clearly. It's better than all the quick cuts and shaky cam that they use in action movies where you can't even tell what the fuck is happening.
And somehow he pulls it off. Slow-mo has always been cool. It will always be cool when it comes to action moments. But he uses it for the worst action.
He does use it in like every action shot. But I don't really give a shit about this. Or anything for that matter.
Like, another good example. There is a slow-mo action sequence where our main character is running. And sometimes firing. And that's it. Like, there's sometimes some, like, lasers going by her.
That shot is in slow motion, so that you see her comrade dying in battle. The slow motion isn't just to focus on action. It helps with seeing a clearer picture of what's happening in the scene.
But she doesn't do anything else. It's, again, just slow-mo of her running through these lasers with the occasional shot being fired, which you don't even see hitting anyone. And then eventually she slides under something. Why slow-mo that?
That's just Zack Snyder's style, bro.
That would be a lot more intense if you had that going at normal speed. She's dodging all of these lasers, it's really high stakes, it's really intense. This thing's collapsing and now she needs to slide to beat it. And she slides and just barely narrowly gets through there. That'd be much better than this 3-minute sequence of her running towards that thing with like a few lasers zipping by her and occasionally her pulling the trigger.
Do you understand how to build tension in a scene? Obviously, you and I know she's not going to die and she is going to make it. But if she just easily slides with no problem, it's boring. The slow motion adds tension and clarity to the scene. There's a reason he likes using it.
It's just, why slow-mo some of these things? I don't get it. I really don't.
Zack Snyder has his own style of how to composite shots and action set pieces. It's like asking why Tarantino likes his actors to talk fast and show their feet. It's just his style.
It feels like when you back where in school for a summer book report and you needed to reach the word limit, so you just start typing a bunch of mumbo jumbled gobbledygook. That's what I feel like he used slow-mo here for, just to pad the runtime a bit longer.
Bro, they actually cut an hour out of this movie. There was more movie and Netflix trimmed it down.
Because I have no other explanation for it. But anyway, we'll move on from the lackluster action. I don't think it's all bad. There are some cool moments here, visually and in the action.
Then why did you say it was lame and badly done, you horse's ass?
And you know what the cool action moments have in common? They're not fucking slow motion.
There is slow motion in literally every action shot in this movie. You can't escape the slow motion.
Like, their non-slow motion action was so much better than the sequences that they tried to slow down. So they really, they should have worked more on that a bit. But there are a few cool moments. Some of the planets they visit are visually interesting. Like, I can really see Zack Snyder had this wild imagination that he wanted to bring to life, but didn't really know how.
I mean, he clearly brought it to life. I don't know what the fuck you're going on about.
So it's kind of just this disjointed mess of visiting a bunch of places in Zack Snyder's brain with no real reason for them to be there narratively that feels rewarding or earned.
The reason for them to be there narratively is that they need people to join their rebellion. If you can follow what's happening, it's not disjointed or a mess. Your ability to analyze things rationally is lacking.
So, like, there's this spider woman who eventually fights the lightsaber wielder, which I think is a really cool concept and a really cool idea. And in fact, the scene between them is pretty good.
Almost positive you said the exact opposite of this sentiment earlier, but I'm going to let it slide because this video is way too fucking long.
But the actual writing of it is terrible.
It's fine, lol, what the fuck?
The spider creature has a couple of minutes to try and make her like a sympathetic character, and then the lightsaber wielder who does join the rebellion has a couple of minutes to try and flesh her out in some way, and then they fight, and then that's it.
So let's just call a spade a spade. The spider creature was just an obstacle to introduce Nemesis. The spider creature's reasonings as a character ultimately don't matter. She is defeated at the end. And unfortunately with the movie format, you have to forego some of that character building to fit in with the time constraints of the movie itself. However, I think you get all you need to get out of Nemesis with just her willingness to 1. Save a child, no questions asked. 2. Do what has to be done even if she doesn't want to do it. And 3. Being remorseful at the end even though she ultimately did the right thing.
We never really see the lightsaber character talk to anybody else ever again, so we get nothing else from the lightsaber character ever.
You don't really need it. Every shot is purposeful in moving the story forward. And with a film like this, you don't really have the time to slow down and have casual conversations explaining a side character's story more. That's just one of the sacrifices you make in filmmaking when you have too many characters in the fray. Some of them get lost in the shuffle.
The spider creature's dead.
That character never really mattered. It was just a means to an end.
I guess spoilers, but it's not an important character anyway. It's just a throwaway, just to showcase some lightsaber action. And it's like, okay, you had this cool visual idea here with the spider creature fighting the lightsaber wielder. You needed something more to tie it together because at the end of the day, like, this was kind of flashy and kind of nice, but there's no real substance there.
There is after the fight where she's remorseful in what she did, but I guess that doesn't matter.
We don't really get anything out of it for the rest of the film, and it's never addressed ever again in the film, so...
Why would they need to address it again or at all? They got what they wanted in recruiting Nemesis at the end.
What the fuck did we really do this for?
To have Nemesis join the party. How many times do I gotta say it?
And there's a couple other moments like that where I'm like, damn, this is kind of a cool place they're visiting. This is a cool atmosphere. We spend 4 minutes there, never to come back, never to address any of it again, and the character that we got in the rebellion from it never says another word to anybody in the crew.
Well, after her fighting the spider creature, they go on to recruit Ray Fisher. You don't really have the time for moments like that. The movie is only 2 hours long. You have to keep the plot moving forward.
So what a waste of time that was.
No. You still have your character moments with Nemesis. What's followed immediately after that is getting Ray Fisher, stuff with the army, then getting captured. I'm going to keep repeating this, but 2 hours isn't a lot of time to have nuanced, menial conversations and stuff like that. You gotta tell your story at the cost of moments like that.
And that's just what the whole movie feels like, a waste of time.
Not to me. I'd probably watch it again before Part 2 comes out.
There is nothing worthwhile in Rebel Moon Part 1.
I disagree. I think it's got a solid story, good action set pieces, Great cinematography.
It doesn't set anything up that makes me like biting at my nails waiting to see what happens in part 2.
Well, I guess we'll see if he's lying or not if he makes a video on part 2.
The villain super sucks. The villain is just cartoonishly evil, and that's his only trait, really. He doesn't have any depth to him either.
He's like your Star Wars villains, and it's kind of nice to just have an evil character. Not every villain has to be sympathetic and have a backstory and all that shit.
Nobody and nothing does. Even the main character, the way that they try and write depth to her is by her monologuing her past, and then them showing the flashbacks. In slow motion, of course, obviously. But outside of her monologues, she doesn't do anything else besides just try and drive a hard bargain for people to join her rebellion.
So what I would have liked to have done was put clips in here that showed Cora saving 2 people from being assaulted. But when I tried to upload the video, it was blocked immediately. So I'll just say Cora does her fair share in this movie, and he's being just a touch facetious to make his argument of this movie being, quote, bad, unquote.
By hard bargain, I mean she literally asks a couple of times, and then usually they say yes. Or she'll do like a very simple chore, and then they'll join.
I'm not going to pull up more clips, but he's being facetious.
Like, it just feels so lame and underwhelming.
I guess if you don't like it, nothing I can say would change that. But don't say it's lame and underwhelming when the movie itself works fine and is pretty good.
I do think the universe has potential. Like, I do think they set up a pretty cool universe, and they introduce an interesting plot element that hasn't been explored in part 1 at all when it comes to, like, potentially breathing life back into creatures and potentially magic. And that could be pretty cool if this film was successful at all in generating any type of interest in seeing it explored more. I just don't know who would sit down and watch this and care about any of the characters at all.
Clearly people watched it. Saying otherwise is dishonest, and there's a strong ensemble cast here that he's just dismissing entirely.
Like, again, they don't have personality. This whole movie is emotionless. It's all muted.
He's repeating his own talking points to make this video longer. But I'm not going to keep saying the same shit over and over again. Either you fuck with Zack Snyder or you don't. I'll just say this outright. If you didn't like Man of Steel, or BVS, or the Snyder cut of the Justice League, you won't like this movie. It's not for everyone. But what I can say for sure is that visually, it's gorgeous. He goes on for like another 5 minutes.
There's a death amongst the rebel crew, and I guarantee there's not a single person out there that cared, because we had only met that character like 20 minutes ago.
I don't think Ray Fisher actually died in part 1. I just know he's going to come back in part 2.
He only had like 3 or 4 lines in total, really, before he died, like after joining the crew. So it has no impact whatsoever. There's no weight to it. And that's just kind of the whole movie. And I also feel like the movie itself has an identity crisis because it tries so hard to be dark and gritty. But it's also very clearly aimed at a PG-13 rating because there's no blood or anything like that.
It's rated PG-13 genius. I'm glad you put 2 and 2 together.
And it pulls all of its punches. So our big evil guy, he has this big stick that he hits people with and kills them with it. But when he hits them with it, after the initial hit, it'll usually cut away to just a close-up of him slamming it down. And then it's implied they are dead because of it. Well, it's not implied, like they are dead because of it, but they don't show anything. Like it doesn't actually go through with the dark and gritty tone.
This cut of the film was toned down for the PG-13 rating. The Snyder Cut, which is rated R, is coming out in a few months. You'd think he'd do the most basic of research before giving the mildest of takes. But no. I found that information in all of 5 seconds. Seriously, what is with this YouTube reviewers being so ignorant and misinformed about every goddamn thing?
It pulls its feet out of the pool at the last second. So the whole film just really feels so messy. It really feels like all this film wanted to do was get to things that Zack Snyder thought would look cool, but he didn't really know how to write it in a way that makes sense to get there.
Bro, if I could follow the fucking plot from A to Z, then I don't see what the goddamn problem is. I'm not a fucking rocket scientist. If my stupid ass could follow what was happening, then chances are most audiences could as well.
So he said, fuck it, we'll just do it anyway. We'll do it live. And that's what it is. It's just this, you go here, recruit them, and leave.
Yes, that is the entire premise of this movie, Jesus fucking Christ.
And while you're doing the going there and recruiting them, you look at something cool. Maybe there's a cool scene that unfolds, like riding a griffin or something, and then you immediately leave. And then that character that joins, you never hear from again. It's just a bad movie, really. Like, there's just not a whole lot that's good about it.
Except for the parts that you liked and were good about it.
I think Zack Snyder has some cool ideas, but he needs someone to really fine-tune that shit and put good writing behind the ideas.
I completely disagree. I think the writing for this movie was fine.
So, yeah. Rebel Moon, Part 1, Child of Fire. It is pretty bad. I'd say it's about as bad as everyone's saying that it is.
First of all, not everyone is saying it's bad. The reviews are mixed for the most part. As for me, I liked the film, but I am a fan of Zack Snyder in general, so I tend to like his work more than the average viewer. I wouldn't consider myself part of the cult because, I don't like 300 or Sucker Punch, and I do think this movie has its problems. But for the most part, it works for me and I enjoyed it. I would say give this movie a chance if you are interested in watching it. Honestly, at this point, I'm saying that for every movie I watch from now on, mainly because of my experience in rewatching Batman and Robin this year. I thought I was going to hate that movie, and the movie surprised me in how silly and enjoyable it was to watch. It changed how I view films as a medium almost completely. But that's just me. If you don't want to watch something made by Zack Snyder, then don't watch this movie. If you're willing to give it a chance, I recommend it. If not for the fact that it's a way to make 2 hours pass by.
That's about it.